All right, cool. So I guess the first question was, how do you start with hand painting? So it's funny, this thing already has a color that's actually perfect for a fire hydrant. So I'm going to just change that to something different so we can sort of see the difference here. If you want, one of the things you can do to start, okay, I'm just going to hit F4 so we can turn off that display. And I also want to turn off my peel seams or map seams. I don't want to see those either. I'm going to hit J on my keyboard. J is in Jack. You can turn that to see selection brackets, turn that off and on. So I'm just going to turn those off. I usually don't like to see them on. All right, so what do we got here? Okay, so to texture this, there's a bunch of ways you can do this. If you're going to start painting by hand, you can take your UVW template. So I'm going to open the editor. Actually, when I said I wasn't going to unwrap this fully, I lied. It's going to drive me mental, so I'm going to have to do it. So let me expand that there. Oops. So I'll just grab that. I'll just go to a flatten for that piece. There we go. And grab this and also do something similar. Actually, I'll turn off ignore back facing so I can grab right through front to back. And I'll just do a flatten on that as well. That might turn out okay. A flatten or maybe an unfold. I don't know. Let's see. Or probably just a planer. So I'll go normal map, front to back. Yeah, front to back works. So I'll take all this. I'm going to do a pack normalize. There we go. Turn on the padding a little bit. Pack normalize. There we go. Yeah, can everybody hear me? Or anybody can't hear me? Hello. Better? Okay. All right, we're back. All right, so I'm just kind of going through here. I'm tweaking the UVs that I've kind of laid out. Should be all right. Let's check it out. I'm going to apply material. I might just throw a quick checker on it. Yeah, by the way, if you guys, you can unmute your mics. That's totally fine. I don't mind that. Unless I've got it set up in a way that it prevents you from me hearing you. I don't know. Let's see. All right. So apply this, set it to visible, and increase the tiling. There we go. All right. So that just gives you a good idea of the checker. Okay. So custom colors. Okay, there's a few ways you can go about this. You could export this to Mudbox, ZBrush, or just render out the UVW template and fill the color inside of Photoshop. That's fine. So I'll go render UVW template. Usually you want to pick the size that you're going to work in. So for us, it's 2048. Render that out. All right, get a nice large template. Yeah, if the lines look broken up, don't worry, because the max window there kind of scales it down to fit your screen. And so it might only be showing at half resolution, a quarter resolution, but if you use your mouse wheel to zoom in, it shows you the correct lines. So I'll save that out. Okay, desktop. Yeah, shouldn't really save to the desktop, but yeah, let's do it anyways. Texture. Fire H text. That's good. Dot TIFF is okay. JPEGs are actually kind of okay, you know, just as you get going, but you want to usually switch over pretty quickly to TIFF or PSD or something like that. I'm going to leave the defaults. I don't need to really touch them because my Photoshop document will kind of take over those settings. Yeah, Targa is okay. TIFF just seems to be a bit more common, I find, these days. Okay. So bring that into Photoshop. Yeah, I have a slightly newer version of Photoshop, I think, than you guys. I don't know, because I've got different versions of software everywhere, so I don't know what I'm actually using right now. Yeah, I think we're on 6 at the school. Okay, so we're good. We're good. All right, so I just have to double click my layer, unlock it. So you can basically just go in right away and fill the whole thing. You can fill the whole screen. Remember what I showed you guys? If you select the black space, so if I shift to the magic wand and select the black space only, I can go to select, save selection. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to just invert my selection. So it might be hard to see. So I've selected just kind of the black space between the UV islands, basically. I'm going to go and hit Control-Shift-I, which basically inverts the selection. And then I'm going to go to Select, Modify, and expand that by maybe like 4 or 5 pixels. One of the reasons we need to do this is actually you need a little bit of padding. A lot of times you need the kind of texture to go a little bit beyond the edges because you can get texture stretching at the UV borders. So yeah, what do I need to do again? The selection or... Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll do it again. Actually, because I think I probably need a bit bigger expansion anyway. So you go to Select, Modify, and Expand. You can expand or you can contract or smooth, but in this case I specifically want to expand. And feather, by the way, what feather does is it kind of like it expands the border, but then it creates like a gradient from a solid selection to a non-selection, so it kind of like fades the selection out. I noticed too, actually, when people go to Photoshop and they start selecting and then they're kind of like masking out, let's say, a person from a background and put them in another background, they almost always use really hard selections, hard edge selections, and you actually want to have a slightly soft selection. And it's more because of photography. You tend to get a lot of slightly soft or defocused edges. So having a little bit of feathering can actually help blend in, you know, cutouts from one image to be placed into another. Anyways, that's a side note, but I might actually expand this by 10 pixels. I just want to test that out. By the way, the padding that I suggested for you guys is fine. You just have to make sure, like my padding is probably a little bit too aggressive. So, or my spacing, I should say, my template. So you might have to sometimes rearrange these clusters just to pull them away from the edges or scale them down just a little bit. But I'm not going to tweak that right now. I'm just going to go with what I got. So, oops, let me minimize ZBrush. So yeah, basically all you want to do is now save that selection. So you go to Select, Save Selection. And I'm just going to call this, I don't know. What should I call it? Texture mask, I guess. Pretty straightforward. So I can always recall that's in under channels. It sort of stores it. You could use it as a alpha mask, or you could just discard it and leave it after you're done. That's fine. You don't have to save it as a. It just kind of adds it. But if you save a specific channel on top of this that is very unique for some reason, that is an alpha, and you call it alpha, that becomes the official alpha channel if you save this out as a TIFF, a Targa, or something else. So. Yeah, there's no like that kind of overrides, because you could have dozens of these things, specific selections that you want to store and come back to later. Okay, so what I'm going to do, you can either just fill with a color. That's fine. I mean, if you guys want to be more free in your texturing, that's okay. You can just kind of fill it with a color of your choosing. I can't see this right now because my my layer above, which is the UV template. I haven't set the opacity or anything. I haven't switched this. Sorry, who's that?
My brother.
Oh, yeah. So I can just kind of switch around the blending mode to get something I like. So maybe lighten or screen is good.
Oh, sorry.
And then I'm just going to lock. I'm just going to lock this. If you want, you can click on your layer. It's fine to be to use reference. So I'll go to fire hydrant. I should mention too, by the way, there's you want to, whether you're doing something painted or if you're doing something more kind of like, let's say, Photoshop composited and hand painted, I think it's always a good idea to reference the same objects you're texturing or something that would be similar to it. So you want to kind of do a little bit of research and figure out, what the sort of surface properties of these objects, or it could be flesh, it could be animal skin, it could be, fabrics, metals, paints, whatever it is. Try and do a little research. But as you're doing your research too, I think something that is overlooked a lot is if you're looking at images, I don't know if you guys can see this clearly enough or sharp enough, but sometimes even high-res images can have kind of strange coloration. They can have kind of noise, or they can look kind of poor in quality once you zoom in. So if you're going to use it as a direct texture, you have to be fairly selective and picky. So keep that in mind as well, right? Just kind of do your research. Like a lot of these fire hydrants, by the way, they get paint. Okay, so Adam asks, can you show the composite way, please, using realistic textures and painting? Yeah, so what I would do is basically, composite I may or may not use in this case. Most of what I would do would be directly in Photoshop. So there are some applications where you can use composite to kind of just break up repeating patterns or textures, or to maybe add small little tiles, not necessarily tiles, but in games you might notice sometimes there'll be a brick wall, but they'll have like 5 different versions of cracks that get kind of overlaid, and that might be like a composite style texturing. But a lot of times objects that want it being repeated tons of times in games, for example. So if you had hundreds of hydrants or hundreds of garbage cans, what you'd wind up having is just like one texture for that can. You might be able to change the color on a color slider, like a hue saturation adjustment, but they'd pretty much all have the same texture. But as I look at things like different fire hydrants, you notice things like the paint gets chipped, it gets rusted off, and sometimes when it gets repainted, it gets kind of gobbed on. So all these layers of like bumpiness, you'd have to think about for a bump map. So the color map might actually look flat. Like in the case of this object, the overall fire hydrant is actually pretty flat in color. There's some slight variation because there's maybe some little chips here. There's some like dirt and mud at the bottom. Right? So you have to kind of evaluate the surface. I'm getting into a bit of theory here, but I think it's really important. So if you notice, right, top of this looks somewhat freshly painted. There's some rust and some wear. So also notice like the shiny areas are the freshly painted stuff. The less shiny or non-shiny areas or non-specular areas are the rust portions, the portions covered with dirt. But they not, so you'll have to think about this. You might want to keep this as a separate layer in Photoshop that you can easily tweak for specular maps and bump maps. You don't necessarily want to be always collapsing things into a flattened layer. You can, for ease of use inside of 3D Max, kind of collapse your Photoshop files to TIFFs temporarily every 10, 20 minutes. But yeah, just keep in mind, when you have some of these different layers that vary the surface or add damage and stuff, you might want to keep them as separate layers to make it easy to generate bump and spec maps later on. So what you could do, like I said, is grab one of these images. Maybe, the easiest way for me to do that is to right-click, copy the image, and just sort of paste it in. And then if I just go with my brush, if you hit B for paintbrush and then hold I, it becomes an eyedropper. Right? So you can kind of create... I usually do the red fire hydrant, but I'll go with this yellow one because it's kind of cool. That doesn't mean I can't look at other red fire hydrants for kind of reference or to help me kind of figure out what's happening. So what I'm looking for is a surface that is evenly lit, that doesn't have specular highlights, because as you notice, if I alt left click and hold, as I move over light spots, specular spots, I actually get specular color. This is good though too, because you could use this inside of Max. The specular color isn't pure white. It's actually just kind of off-white and slightly yellow. So you could actually set that up as a parameter inside of Max when you kind of do your final steps in setting up the this image. But what I want is something that kind of represents something that isn't in shadow, isn't reflecting highlight, but kind of represents the base color of the object. So and I'm looking for something that's kind of represents the color, but is sort of tonally neutral. So this yellow seems to be about right. I'm going to test it out. So I'll just go back down here and I'll use my paint bucket. So to me, that seems about right. So I'm going to do select similar here, and let's see. Select similar, there we go. And I'll just make that a quick kind of layer mask so I can kind of see, right? Yeah, that seems about right to me. That seems okay. Okay, so from this point, you could just go in and hand paint. What a lot of people like to do, I don't really have... yeah, you want to know why that fire hydrant's yellow? Ew. Okay, let's see. I'm going to bring this thing in. Oh, yeah, let's get out of that. What some people will do, sometimes they have high poly sculptures or they just have just the mesh on its own. If you hit 0 on your keyboard, this is what's called a render to texture tool. Yes, double yuck. So what render to texture can do is basically kind of bake out things like ambient occlusion. What ambient occlusion is, let me just bring that up. Ambient occlusion. What it sort of does is it kind of looks at the surface of an object, and anywhere where there's kind of connection points. So if we take a look at this image, hopefully I can get it in nice high res. What happens is in reality, you've got light that comes from, let's say, one major source or a bunch of sources, but then it bounces off a bunch of other surfaces. Well, all that bounce lighting kind of generates a lot of soft shadows and kind of cracks and crevices and points of contact between surfaces within an object and between objects. So that's ambient occlusion. It's basically it's ambient shadows would be another way to say it, right? It's where light is occluded or light is prevented from going in. So what we can do is actually kind of help to define or create or generate some sense of shape and volume by actually creating an ambient occlusion pass. This is something that isn't always done, but it seems to be done more and more, and I find it can add a nice stylized look. So for this, what you want to do, let me go back. You start with your object selected. I should have the bolts added in this as well, but that means I have to update the unwrap, and I'm being really lazy tonight, so forgive me. So you can either go to, I think it's Tools. I actually never find it in here. I never go here, but I think it's Tools, Render to Texture, or sorry, it's under Rendering actually. Render, and then where is it? Somewhere in the middle or the bottom? I don't know. Yeah, right in the middle. Render to Texture. But I usually just hit 0 on the keyboard. Make sure the object is selected. Even if you don't start with the object selected, you can select it and it puts the object in this list. So the first one just tells you, okay, you're going to bake something out. I'm going to turn on, I'm going to just, there's a padding setting here, by the way. You can increase this. This is by pixel size, so you can set that to 3 or 4. And then we can also scroll down. It usually will kind of want to give you automatic unwrapping, but this thing already has an unwrap that I've generated. So I'm going to make sure I turn on Use Existing Channel. So mapping coordinates object. Use existing channel. Should be channel 1. By the way, you can have multiple unwraps on an object. They just go and do what's called a map channel. It should be called a UV channel. That's really what it means. But a map channel, so that fire hydrant can have 2 or 3 different unwraps, and the reason they might have different unwraps is that, well, maybe you want to simply throw in a logo, and the logo only needs a planar, like a square, flat kind of UV projection to go on the surface. So that could have a map channel of 2. And when you go into the material editor, if you take a look, do I have one added? Yeah, let me just actually re-add this. Go to bitmap and I'll show you where that is. I'll just throw this on for now. But yeah, if you take a look at map channel 1, right? If I switch it to map channel 2, there's no unwrap information in map channel 2, so it just kind of smears like a couple of pixels over that surface because it doesn't know how to handle that. So you can have multiple unwraps or kind of like UV information on an object. Again, that's kind of a little extra that not kind of crucial information, but it's useful to know because you might need it someday. Let's see, sort by date. Switch this to TIFF. There we go. And actually, I'll just save this also on the desktop file. Save as desktop. If I'm saving out as a TIFF just for working, I usually disable the layers, and I'll just tell it to kind of save over what I've got. So if you're going to use any compression, use LZW, because LZW is supported by Max, Zip, or JPEG. Inside of a TIFF format is not supported. And I want to discard the layers. So somebody asked, how could you copy the unwrap info to a new channel? I believe you can actually just go to Tools and go to Channel Info. So if you wanted to copy the same exact unwrap info into 2 different channels, there isn't really a need for that. But if you wanted to, and then kind of tweak the second version of the unwrap, you can just literally copy the channel and then paste the channel. Oops. Sorry, maybe I'll make a... Sorry, let me try that again. Copy. Oh yeah, sorry. I'm going to actually have to add another unwrap as well. So I'm going to go to unwrap UVW and go to channel 2. I'm going to just abandon the changes. So map channel 2, and if I reload channel info, I now see map channel 1 and the new map channel 2. So I can actually copy that data and paste it in. Again, I don't think you need to do this. Usually you would have just a separate unwrap for some other reason, like I said, to put a label on a bottle or something of that nature. You typically don't need it the same exact unwrap in 2 channels because you've got one that you can just use for different materials. Anyways, let's go back to Photoshop here. All right, so I'm going to just hide this thing out. Right, I was going to actually go into Max and do the basically create a ambient occlusion map. So I set my channel to channel 1. Yeah, I'll just click on the render setup button, but F10 opens it. So I'm just going to go into a render and just switch to mental ray. Sorry, mental ray, not iRay. Come on iRay. Okay. So what that should allow you to do is see a ambient occlusion option in here. Ambient occlusion in brackets MR, mental ray, right? So I'm going to add that as a render element. Again, you can add all kinds of different renderings, but I don't really need to worry about that. So I'm going to just scroll down. This kind of defaults to whatever your default project folder is. I can just kind of tell it to go to the desktop, and that's fine. I'll say OK for 32-bit. That's OK. Set my texture size to match, 2048 by 2048, right there. I'm going to increase the samples. So samples usually you want at 128 anywhere up to 256. You can just go lower though and blur it. That's not a big problem. The spread. So what happens is the spread of the shadow from the kind of cracks and crevices. Sometimes you want to increase that. I find setting it to like 2 or 3 can be really, really good. And then I'm going to just try and hit render. It'll give you a warning because it tells you like, oh, this ambient occlusion map is not going anywhere. It's not going into any material slot. And I'm just going to tell it to say, don't bug me again. Let's just make this thing. Okay, so I'm going to just check my desktop. So all right, having trouble finding it actually, so let's see if it actually saved anywhere. Try that one more time. Yeah, I set the sample size to 128. Yeah, I find it tends to help with the quality or kind of crispness, because sometimes if the samples are too low, what you get is really, really grainy ambient occlusion. So I'll show you what this looks like. Ambient occlusion samples. If you have really, really low samples, you'll get something that kind of looks like this, right? So 8 samples to 16 samples will look really like just speckled and noisy. And for me, I find 128 to 256 just gives you the best results. It does result in slower render times, but it's worth it, right? You're getting quality. So if you take a look at this, right? Really, really low samples, very, very grainy. Very high samples, nice and smooth. No. Yeah, for ambient occlusion, it just gets calculated automatically. So it's almost like kind of sets up an imaginary lighting system that bounces. It's kind of like setting in a bunch of very soft light from a bunch of angles, from every angle, basically. So yeah, ambient occlusion kind of just gets calculated as this sort of special kind of like invisible lighting system that it generates. Okay, so what was I doing again? Yes, go to 0. Get all that set up. Let's do that. You know what? Silly jerk was kind of hiding it in the default, and it also wasn't saving the right size here. So let me try this again. 2048. And increase the samples, 128. Increase the spread to maybe 2.5. But yeah, actually, here, let me just show you what that looks like again. So if I open this up, you guys see where all those bolts were? The bolts are causing, even though it's still not even the same object, the bolts on that are actually causing dark shadows, and then like an ambient kind of fading out of that sort of shadow work is in contact. And also the ridges or rims of that thing are kind of causing a bit of a soft shadow. So let's try it again. I might actually decrease the spread back down to about 1. That's in units, max units, which is 1 unit is 1 inch basically. So if things are kind of on the right scale for you, then they should kind of represent reality to some degree. Yes, what a jerk indeed. Yeah, and you can see now actually this rendering is now the proper resolution. It is going a little bit slower than the last one, but it's moving along pretty good though. It's funny, the machines you guys have in that 4G1 lab are, I think they might be replaced next year, possibly. They're very old, so you're probably going to notice at times it's like things are lagging and stuff. So if things are lagging, one of the things you can do is turn off realistic shading in the viewport. I'll show you guys that in a minute. So I want to make sure everybody's hearing me okay, yeah? Or am I going robo voice? Oil. No, your blood is my oil. All right. Cool. All right. So if I go back, my easy, lazy way to kind of find wherever this damn file is just click on the little file and name box. There's a little box to the right of that. And then just selecting the file and going to open, just like kind of right click and open it, and you can see the preview there. Now I've got Faststone at home. I'll show you guys a little tip here. So if you go to, I think it's under settings, and then you go to settings again. If you go to associations, or sorry, not associations, programs, you can hit add and kind of find your Photoshop and add it to the list. So what'll happen is if you hit anything in your viewer, if you hit E, it actually will just launch that immediately inside of Photoshop. Okay, so I'm going to select this. So again, you don't have to go this kind of technical route if you're really not into that kind of thing for your textures. That's fine. You can just start with your base color and then just kind of start hand painting inside of Photoshop, or go into 3D Max and use the canvas paint canvas tool there. With this thing though, I'm going to show you. If I just go to multiply now, right? I'll turn off my grid. You see, I've actually basically applied the ambient occlusion directly in. If you notice, actually, on a lot of the Dota characters, and if you look, I think I gave you guys 2 Dota character sheet PDFs. Let me actually try and find them now. Dota 2 character texture, something or other. Right. So what they do, this can apply. Like what I'm doing is not anything new, but it's a kind of a cool technique. So they literally start with a kind of a flat base color that they work from. In this case, the bear, this kind of polar bear character, is in a low res, but there's also a high resolution sculpt. So what they do is they have an unwrap, and then they bake out the high resolution ambient occlusion map and apply it to the low res unwrap. And then they just make that like a multiply basically on top of their base color. And then after that, they actually start layering in colors inside of Photoshop. So they'll kind of test kind of color patterns, color combinations. And this is a really, really cool technique. I really like this a lot. So I'm going to just paste the link in for you guys. Everybody's got it. And there's another one too that talks about really, really great documentation. It talks about color. So if you're doing something, if you want to kind of reimagine these characters that you've got and you've unwrapped, they do talk about kind of color theory, color combination. I know you guys have classes on this, and if you want me to go over some of this, I can. But if you want kind of a clever cheat sheet, these 2 PDFs are actually really, really fantastic. So I'll paste that one in as well. There you go. So yeah, they talk about different colors, color theory, color combinations, how that works. So there you go. I don't want to get too far into this right now. I just kind of want to cover the stuff that you need to get going. So yeah, this fire hydrant, I'm going to turn this thing back on. I noticed there's just like subtle hints of orange. The orange could be reflection from the environment, from the sky, from the sun, from, I don't know, something orange, a killer tangerine off screen. But what I'm going to do, actually, I can take the color and adjust it. So I'm going to add a hue saturation. And I'm going to just kind of do a colorize on this. You notice if I colorize, oops, what do I want to do here? Yeah, if I colorize, it's gonna kind of colorize everything below, which I don't necessarily want. So, yeah, drawing a blank actually. Sorry guys. Let's see. I want to try and link layers. I don't know if that'll work, but yeah, I'm gonna actually skip the adjustment layer on that. But what I'm gonna do is just do a hue saturation directly to this layer. Effects layer 3. Yeah. Yeah, I forgot how to do it actually. It's been a little while since I've done it. Yeah, that's what it was. Clipping mask. Thank you. I haven't used that feature enough. Yeah, create clipping mask. So, yeah. Oh, I don't want a brightness contrast. Let me undo that and do that again. All right. So if I right click the adjustment layer, the adjustment layer will actually affect everything below it. So you see when I turn on colorize, it just kind of desaturates. It applies whatever settings are in hue saturation to everything below. But if I right click the hue saturation layer or any adjustment layer that's just sitting above another layer, go to create clipping mask, it'll only affect the immediate layer below it. Thank you, Adam, by the way. So if I now colorize this, I'm going to just kind of turn this off in isolation. So if you see saturation, I can make this thing a little bit maybe more orangey red. And now I've got this like extra punch of color, right? So instead of just making it kind of a flat black gray addition of color, you know, I can do something a little bit more sort of special and punchy for that. So if I just quickly save this out to my texture and kind of pop back over to max. So many tabs, too many tabs. All right, let's close that up. Now check this out, right? It just instantly looks better, right? And I'll tell you, for hand-painted textures, especially if you're going for something that's non-photorealistic, even if you're going for something photorealistic, but especially non-photorealistic stuff, when you have gradients in your textures, it just has this like tremendous visual appeal. So keep that in mind, like nice soft brushes, sometimes even chunky brush strokes can work too, but having a good degree of gradients in your textures can actually really improve the visual appeal of those textures. Right, so okay, so Adam asks, ambient should be set up before going into detail doing hand painting. You don't actually have to do the ambient at all, but what the ambient can do is kind of help give you guidelines of what you're painting in Photoshop, and it can also help give you like a really quick and fast way to help set up the stylization of those textures, right? So, yeah. Now, one other thing you could do is maybe I'll try a brightness contrast. Let's try that, or I'll put that below. So in brightness contrast, if I just increase the brightness or increase the contrast and maybe lower the brightness, you know, I can kind of tweak and control how much. So this is one reason why you might want to have a higher spread, right? So the ambient occlusion will spread out more, but that will require more samples to make it less grainy. I don't know if you guys can see, but there is a graininess in my texture here. So I could kind of tweak that. You know, I could also just blur it in Photoshop. You know, if you don't feel like kind of re-rendering everything and doing all that stuff, you know, that's totally fine. All right. Also, don't forget, you can tweak, you know, this doesn't just have to be in multiply. It can be in color burn, which actually adds a nice kind of punchiness to this. So I'll try that one out. And let's take a look inside of Max. Should update any second. Yeah, I actually think I like that kind of punchiness more. The other thing I might do, just to kind of help clean this up, because those bolts, they could move, they could shift around. I may not like their location. So let me just turn off the adjustment mask, turn this off. I'll switch color burn back to normal. Well, yeah, it's fine. It's a good cartoony look. I don't want this to be the only step, though, by the way. So if you're hand painting, you're going to have to add many, you know, you're going to have to add a few additional layers of detail. If if you're blending, let's say, photoreal stuff too, then that's fine. You know, you can use this, or you can just go with more hand painted texture. Or sorry, more photoreal kind of compositing and masking and blending and all that. Okay, yeah. So what I was gonna do, just go to brush here. Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to just use my wand and select similar, select similar. I just want to kind of fill these in. I don't necessarily want them to be part of this image so much. So not entirely necessary, especially if I'm not moving any of the bolts or anything like that. But yeah, is it necessary to add color to the ambient occlusion? No, it's not. But I think for very cartoony, right? If you look at most cartoons, or if you're looking, you know, this Dota stuff is a really good reference point. And you can even duplicate this. So I'm going to actually try that. Let's duplicate the layer. Move this above. Let's turn this stuff on, turn that on. Let's turn that off, actually. And I'm going to switch this layer to color burn, as I liked. Color burn. Oh, sorry. Not sure what I did. I kind of ruined my texture here. Ah, there we go. Just undo enough and it fixes everything. Okay. So, yeah, I'm going to try and duplicate this layer. Duplicate layer. Man, it really didn't like the duplicate. So I'm going to just hit Control V to paste this. Or go back, select everything here again, Control C, Control V. And I can actually just add this even on top of everything else. So I can add a multiply, maybe tone down the opacity a bit. So I can actually even have multiple layers of kind of ambient occlusion at work, right? Yeah, maybe it did distort the clipping mask, but whatever. I figured a quick way out of that mess. So, okay, so for hand painting, okay, now I'm going to admit this. I'm not the greatest hand painter alive. So for you guys, I mean, what you might want to do, and I see a lot of people doing this, so you could move this thing off to the side. There is a little trick you guys can use as well. If you want to expand your canvas, you can go to Image, Canvas Size. Okay. So Image, Canvas Size. All right. And then if you go to Width, if you click one of these buttons, either to the left or to the right, it's kind of a really bad interface. You can go like, let's say 150% in that direction. So it kind of adds this extra space off to one side. So I can now just kind of take this thing, have it as a floating reference. Just remember to crop that back out. And make sure it's accurate. Don't, you know, don't forget that. One thing you could do to help yourself out, if you have the Move tool inside of Photoshop, which is basically the little arrow, you can click on it in the upper left corner over here. Or if you hit V on your keyboard, you also need to have rulers set up. So if you have rulers, you can pull a ruler over from the left side or the right side, depending on whichever way this is going. And then you go to Image, Image, Canvas Size, and then you do your whatever, 150%. I think I went this way, 150%. And what you have is a guideline that sits here that you can snap to or crop to after. You can see the blue line there, right? The guideline. So that'll allow you to kind of accurately recrop that, okay? So now if I select my base color layer, I can go in, and with a brush, if I hold Alt, I can kind of come in, I can paint some yellow, I can grab some more yellow, different variations of yellow, you know, maybe using different brush sizes. Sorry, I've got a massive tablet, so This might be a little bit difficult for me to do here just because my mic stand is in the way, but I'll try and get a setup to work. All right. Can you guys still hear me? Or is that too far away? Okay, good. Everybody's good then. All right. So you can set up a soft brush or a rough wide brush. You can tweak the so let me just click over here. Actually, that's kind of cool. Kind of go on, just giving it a rough, uneven texture, right? So we can kind of do this, and if we hold Alt and eyedrop and pick different colors, there's actually some really kind of dirty brown stuff going on here. I can kind of lay that in. Again, remember, you can adjust opacity, you can adjust blending mode. So watch if I do color burn, right? I'm just going to do a big streak. You see that? So, you can kind of get in there and really kind of rough things up and abuse the surface. And if you kind of start tweaking, don't be afraid to dig into some of the Photoshop brush settings. We've got spacing. Let me actually click on this. Yeah, I'll turn down the spacing. I'm going to go to shape dynamics, size jitter. I'm going to scatter this a little more. And what else? Shape dynamics. I'm going to turn on the round. Is it roundness? No, angle jitter. So this kind of rough brush will start throwing down stuff in all sorts of angles in different directions. So now, if I that's my super quick painting demo, but it looks kind of cool, right? So I'll go to File, Save As, do my thing again. Okay, I'm going to show you guys a way to do this part of it, the whole saving as. So if I save this as a PSD, but I want to save it as a TIFF every time and not have to like go through all the steps, I'll show you a way to do that in a minute. So let's pop over to Max. And oh yeah, my texture's screwed up. So let me go back and crop that sucker. So I'll just try and do the canvas size. Actually, no, that's not. I'm going to crop it. Okay, so I'll just start from that side, and if you have snap turned on, you just have to go to where is it? View snap. You can turn snap off and on here, and you can tell it to snap to guides or other things. But I'll just hit enter, crop that, and then do my save as. That should update properly, and we should see it any second. There we go. All right, so I got that nice kind of rough, uneven surface happening. I've got kind of flecks and specks. So I'm kind of combining like photorealism and stylized painting, right? Again, blending, tweaking blending modes, or even what I like to do too for a little bit of control. I've painted directly on this color layer, so I'll turn all these off. This is all directly in the color layer, but what you could do is just have a separate layer and change the blending mode of that layer. So that can kind of give you more experimental options, right? So if I go back in with the brush, let me eyedrop some more stuff in here. And don't be afraid too, you can add other color variations as well. So you don't just have to pick from that palette. You can try taking your color. So I'm doing this on a separate layer, by the way, right? Let's see. So this is just a separate layer of some extra kind of grime or whatever. I'll pull this on top of everything. If I take Control I and invert it, now I've got basically it's a complementary color. It's the exact opposite color on the color wheel from the color I was painting in. So I can throw these in as some different layers and then tweak blending modes and opacity that way. So for me, I find sometimes it's hard to manage the opacity of the brush itself. I like to kind of paint in layers when I do paint, and then just kind of tweak the blending mode and opacity or visibility, let's say, so we can kind of do that. There we go. So I got some like kind of blue discoloration there going on. It may be from old posters or stickers or something. So again, you know, a lot of this is about observation and applying your observation. I think there's a PowerPoint that I left you guys. Let's see, Dawson. Yeah, I kind of talk a bit about this in a PowerPoint. I'm not gonna go through that, but I'll kind of quickly go over it though. So, you know, looking at reference, studying real world objects, getting scans of textures, you know, really just kind of trying to study the surface. I don't want to get into bumps and specs just yet. I'm going to do that properly next Tuesday, or if there's enough demand, I can maybe do a little earlier lecture like this, possibly on the weekend or something. I don't know, but we'll figure that out. Or, you know, I'll do the Tuesday lecture. If anybody wants a refresher, there'll probably be a video copy of that at least, and maybe we can do another Google session as well. But anyways, yeah, if you guys have that or don't have that, I believe you can go to My Dawson and download that. That's under Digital Textures number 4. Yeah, for photoreal textures, we've kind of already covered a lot of the same techniques like what I showed you guys in Photoshop for the brick wall, you know, masking, adding damage. When it comes to something like a fire hydrant, you know, this is a good example because a fire hydrant can have rust, it can have different layers of metal showing through. Don't be afraid, and actually I highly encourage you to search out different types of rust. You know, just look up general rust patterns, images of rust, and then you can mask these things. Just make sure the scale is kind of appropriate because some of these things are really, really close to the surface. They're very, very close up. So you might have to scale them down or zoom out or find a different kind of rust. For example, this is actually a good example. The image itself seems fairly decent in terms of quality. It might be a little bit digitally noisy, but since I figure I'm scaling it down, that will help obscure that. So I'm going to right-click this, copy image, paste it in. Now, if I zoom in, and I'm going to scale this down, like I said, because I do want it. Well, let's say actually I went this way. I'm going to scale it up, actually, just to prove a point. Let me crop this thing down. I'm going to hide this off. Before I do, though, I'm going to pull my fire hydrant back in. Okay, so let's hide the hydrant. Let's grab this thing. Again, this I would probably want to do as a layer mask. So this thing I've actually scaled up, and it's a very, very large rust. One of the first things you should always do, there's harsh shadows in this and harsh highlights. So with that layer selected, I'm going to go to Image, Adjustments, and try and do a shadow highlights on that. And you can see that actually helps even out the tonality, the shading of the highlights. It helps to remove the shadows and flattens the image. Sometimes you lose a little bit of contrast, so you might have to apply a brightness contrast. I might just do this directly on the layer. So I'll just bring the brightness down a bit and maybe, actually, you know what, I'll do a hue saturation instead because I can do that here. I'm going to bring back some of the saturation and bring the lightness down a bit. So that's the original, and that's the kind of edited, more flattened version. You can, as I showed you guys before, go in and add another layer, let's say an adjustment layer, and paint in a layer mask, kind of to even out shadows and get rid of shadows and stuff. But again, I don't kind of want to cover that territory again, at least not at the moment. I can a bit later on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my opacity back up, set my brush to normal. I'm going to add a layer mask, and then let's, in the layer mask, fill this thing with black. And then I'll kind of brush back in some of this stuff. All right. Now this kind of rough wide brush is useful, but it's kind of scattering a little too much. So I'm going to just take the scattering option here and bring that down a bit. But I still want the roughness, because what the roughness allows me to do, especially with a blended rust like this, it actually can help sell the blending and realism of like a paint chip that then exposed metal that then caused the metal to rust. You do want some of the flakes and things to show through. Again, a lot of this just comes from observation, so I want you guys to kind of keep that in mind. So yeah, I want to keep that some of that edge in there. So I might have to get down with a very small brush and do that, but. And I'm just flipping back and forth with X, flipping between black and white for this brush. There we go. So you can kind of see, right? It starts to really sell this effect. My main problem with it, though, is that the scale of that image was taken extremely close up. There's still shadows that I should paint out. So as I said, I could go into a, let's say, brightness contrast, and I'll right-click that, make that a clipping layer. Clipping mask. There we go. And then I'll take the brightness up, but I'm going to fill that mask for the brightness. I'm going to flip that to black, and then I can, in that mask, kind of hand paint out the shadows that way. Again, I don't want to kind of bore you guys to death by doing every little detail on that, but it's one way you can kind of help neutralize shadows. And I can tweak the brightness contrast so it's a little more even instead of being so, super bright. Okay. Now, I'm going to delete that layer and just kind of show you what's going to happen here. So I'll do a save as. Okay, I think the problem with this is, and this happens, people just don't really think about it, the scale of those paint chips and the degree of the detail that is on that scale, it's too much. It's a mismatch. The damage and the kind of resolution and size of those things is just way too high. Now, I'm going to tell you a little cheat, actually. So I still have some shadow present. If you want to hide or fake, not hide or fake the shadow, but if you want to hide the shadow, and if you want to avoid painting it, I can just flip this damage upside down so that the shadow would be facing in the appropriate direction, right? Because normally the sun would be coming from a high angle and the shadow should be on the underhang, not kind of on the opposite side here. So I'm going to cheat this part. Don't tell your teacher I told you it's okay to cheat. Okay. I'm also going to scale this, right? Because as I said, the scale doesn't kind of match. If I were to have that kind of damage, it should probably be a little bit smaller. So I'm going to scale it so it's kind of more appropriate to the scale of the object. Again, it's a good thing to keep this as a separate layer because, if we're doing a spec map, most of this might be shiny and white. So a spec map... yeah, I don't want to get into spec map and stuff just yet, but I do want to mention that you might want to keep some layers of damage and let's say differentiation in the surface. You might want to keep that separate. I'm going to put this below the hue saturation as well, one of the hue saturations I've got. And that actually seems to work kind of nicely, but I might try, let me see if I can duplicate this thing. Duplicate the hue saturation, put that above this. Ooh. Disable or release clipping mask, put that above, create clipping mask. Okay, so that clipping mask is now only applied just to that new rust. It doesn't have to be the exact same color. I'm just seeing if I can maybe get a little bit of a better blend. Let's see, turn off colorize. Okay, so I just want to sort of enable, disable. Yeah, and it just kind of blends it in a little better. So some of the pattern that might be kind of half chewed up, so there might be little flecks of the original paint mixed in with the rust and the chipping. By using that little hue saturation, I might kind of sell the blending a little bit better by tweaking some of those colors. So, all right. Okay, so you see, I want to mention this. I keep going to Alt-Control-S, which does a save as, and I keep saving out to this file, right? So what I can do, I'm just going to save this as a PSD. So I have basically like a work document for my texture. But I want this to constantly and easily and automatically update this so I don't have to kind of worry about flattening the layers and getting all the settings right. Oh, hold on, there's a question. So, after, if it's possible and texture allows it, could you show the method used to fix a seam when inside a 3ds Max? Yes, I'll show you that too. Viewport canvas, I'll show you that. Again, you can also use viewport canvas completely just to hand paint the texture, right? So we can take a look at that as well. So this thing, let's just double check Max and see. So, again, ideally, you should paint these shadows out so that we can kind of make this happen inside of a bump map. But if you have to cheat, just make sure the shadow is falling in the correct direction. So I did that by just flipping that. I would still want to paint out the shadow as much as possible, but I'm just trying to accelerate this for time. Okay, so what I wanted to show you guys, there's something called actions in Photoshop. I don't know if anybody knows about actions, but if you go to Window, Actions, it opens up this new little panel. And inside there's a bunch of pre-made actions. So I'm going to just kind of go to this image over here that we have. And you can actually apply vignettes. So if you click on vignette and hit the play button, it's going to run through a set of actions and create a vignette for the image. Let me try that again. I'll try maybe molten lead. I'll select molten lead and hit play. I might have to use an actual image to generate this, or to demonstrate it more properly. So give me a sec. So yeah, there's molten lead. Pretty nasty looking thing. But what it does is it actually has a series of instructions inside of Photoshop that have been recorded. So it actually does all these steps if you expand it. So what is my point in all this? Well, what you can actually do is if you have any task inside of Photoshop that is completely repetitive, you can actually record it and then save those actions, bring them with you. You can repeat them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go click on New Action. It's called Action 1. I'm just going to call this Flatten Save As, I guess. Hit Record. So it's recording everything I'm doing. I'm just going to go to File, Save As. I'm going to select my TIFF and set its location. I'm going to disable the layers. There we go. Disable the layers. Make sure the naming is correct. Hit Save. I want to replace it, yes. LZW compression and discard layers. Hit OK. If you had other things, like maybe you turn off and on your UV template, you can actually have that as part of the action. So if you keep the template on, you can also have that part of the action. So you turn off the template, go to Save As, save it out. And then when you're done, you turn the template back on. You could record that too. So I'm going to hit Stop. So I've now got my Flatten Save As. And so if I'm, I don't know, I'm doing other stuff here. I'm going to move this around, yada, yada. All I have to do now is hit play, and it's done. I go to Max. It should update. Just make sure it's actually saving out. Oh, yeah. In this case, if it wants to change the name to copy, because Photoshop just always insists on doing this. I think there's a way to disable that too. But anyways, I can just tell it to load from that version of the file, and I'll just rename it at the end and make sure it's all linked properly. So I'll do that now very quickly. I'll just relink this to the right file, or my kind of temporary working copy. So if I jump back to Photoshop and, again, I tweak this thing, I'm going to move it over here. I'm going to flip the colors, invert it, which is not what I want to do, but it's really gross. And I'll just hit the play button. And when I jump over to Max, it's not going to work. Yeah, I don't know why. It was actually linking to the right file because I did update it, but for some reason the display didn't update. I'll try that one more time here. Let's just change the color back. I'll hit the play button on my actions. And there we go. It actually updated properly this time. So actions can be really powerful. It saves you a lot of time, because if you're kind of always doing the same set of steps to process something, then just use actions. Record it, Make sure you stop recording when you're done, and then you can play it back. Pretty cool. Okay, well, I think your silence means yes. Just remember, so yeah, create a new action right here. It automatically starts recording, and then you make sure you stop it when you're done your final action, and then you can hit play to play it back. And I believe if you go to the little menu here, you can go to save actions. I don't know why it's not highlighted though, but I think you might have to create an action set. So you go to new set, Matt's actions, and then I think, yeah, if I just drag that in there, then I can take that set and go to save actions. So I can kind of carry that with me from home to the lab to wherever. All right. Oh yeah, okay, so I guess one thing I'll cover is the viewport canvas. Now keep in mind, if you're working in a PSD, that's okay. If you want to actually edit the layers of the PSD itself and not the flattened TIFF or Targa version, make sure you load the PSD into the texture. If you want to kind of experiment, that's fine. You can just use the TIFF and use that as an experiment. The other cool thing is with the viewport canvas, if I go to Tools, Viewport Canvas, you have to do this, by the way, with the object selected. So make sure it's actually, selected, and we can go to Tools, Viewport Canvas. And as soon as you hit any of the paint brushes, it's going to ask you, do you want to use the diffuse map? So I'll pick diffuse map. And what you can now do, just like Photoshop, is you can duplicate the layer, keep the original. You can just add a new layer, right? So with a new layer, I can, maybe I can throw graffiti on there. I right-clicked. I didn't want to right-click, actually. So let me just go back to Paint, create a new layer. I'm holding Control and Shift, and then left-clicking and dragging. I can turn this down. I can go... graffiti this up. There you go. And just like Photoshop, I can tweak the opacity. I can switch the blending mode. In this case, it's not going to be terribly exciting, just being kind of flat black, but that's it. Now, if you want to, let's say, blend out some seams or something like that, so I would probably duplicate the layer. So, it's always a decent idea to keep a backup copy, but there's a little seam actually along here from some of my hand painting. So all I'm going to do is basically go to the clone stamp, Control Shift, left click and drag. I'm going to Alt sample from one spot, brush it in, or kind of find a similar area. By the way, when you're doing this, you should ideally switch from realistic to consistent colors, and it just takes out all the shadows. So all you're seeing is like pure flat diffuse, right? So you can really, really easily see what's happening. The other thing you want to do is click on consistent colors, go to configure, and turn off shadows, because there still might be some shadows showing up in the viewport. But what I'm going to do is just kind of go Alt click, or very nearby. I might take the draw size down and then just kind of brush that. With some of these edges, because of the ambient occlusion, it might be a little bit tough, but just kind of, you want to grab an area that's very, very nearby. So I'll click again. There we go. Okay. So everybody's good with that, I hope. So visually similar areas, kind of mix and match as you go. Introduce some other stuff from other areas. Okay. Yeah, with my brush too. Remember, you can also vary brush size and radius just like Photoshop. So keep that in mind. All right. I think Adam is dying for sleep. So yeah, the question is, can you save this out? You can just go File, Save, PSD As. So remember, you got your original PSD, you got the new version. What you can do is copy so for example, these two new layers that I've created. I can actually just use, let's say, this layer 2. I'll rename it to seams fixed. And that will be my new updated base color layer. And if I double click on this, I'll call this graffiti, whatever, right? I can never spell graffiti properly because I'm totally illiterate. So yeah, if I save that PSD, what I would kind of do is merge the 2 new layers that I painted and then just combine that with the other separate layers that I've got organized inside of Photoshop. Cool. Oh, by merging, what I mean too is I would just copy from one document, paste into the other. As far as I know, I don't think there's any actual like file merge PSDs or anything like that. So, all right. Yeah, I think we'll skip the ZBrush thing. It might be a little bit too much because you kind of have to learn a lot and learn a whole new program. But yeah. All right. Hopefully that's good for everybody.